So this book contains about 140,000 Japanese words, and what makes these words unique is that they were all intentionally written by this Japanese author, spread across 482 pages. But the words in the context of this book become really powerful. So powerful that when you reach the last page of this book, these words have invoked some kind of feeling, emotion inside your brain, and this allows your brain to attach these words to these feelings so that you will never forget these words. Now these 140,000 words form conversations, thoughts, detailed descriptions, and of course a coherent story. See, after getting back into reading, actually reading this book, I realized that books really have the potential to reach your subconscious because they create emotions and they create these memories. But then I realized that if you combine this power that these books have to reach your subconscious and you combine it with words and learning vocabulary, then it can really boost your vocabulary or language learning in general. So let me explain how this process works and how you do it. Because what's fascinating is that even if you're not intentionally learning these words, they will still reach your subconscious. So language works in a really peculiar way. Take this sentence for example. If English is not your native language, then you will probably not have difficulties with this sentence, except maybe this one word, peculiar. But what's interesting if you look at it is that this word also carries most of the meaning in this sentence. And this is actually not a weird phenomenon. This happens all around language, every language. Actually, here's another example that I found. Reiko sighed and picked up the basketball again. Probably the verb to sigh and the noun basketball carry most of the meaning in this sentence, but they're also the two most uncommon words in this sentence. And so the uncommon words usually carry most of the meaning in any sentence. And like I said, this phenomenon works in every language. For example, the other day when I was walking outside, and you should try this for yourself. If you're going outside and you're walking past other people, try to kind of listen to what they're saying. You'll find that this is actually true. The word that carries most meaning is also probably really uncommon. For example, a conversation could go like this. What did you do yesterday? Oh, well, I went to an aquarium. Oh, really? And what did you do after that? Well, after that, I went to see a festival. Now, let's say that you don't know these words, which is likely because they are uncommon, right? Festival or aquarium. What do? Now, if you're reading a book and you don't know this word, your natural response would probably be to look up the word, right? And that's understandable, that's what I would do as well. But for a moment, let's forget about the books and just ask, how do you learn a new word? How do we learn words? How does our brain learn new words? To explain this, I am going to use another example. Now, when I meet someone at work, I try to introduce myself and then have them introduce themselves, and I try to remember their names. Now, I'm not saying that I suck at remembering people's names, but sometimes I do end up forgetting them. So there's this thing that I always do, and it's the same with language. Hey, nice to meet you. My name is Angelo. You're new here, right? I heard you're from this city. How long have you been living here? So I try to make some small talk, maybe like 1 or 2 minutes. After that, I go back to their name. Let's say their name is Gary, okay? I met a guy named Gary a few days ago. Okay, well, wait, what was your name again? Gary. Oh, it's Gary, okay. So G-A-R-Y. So at the end of our small talk, I will ask the name again. I'll have them say it. I will repeat it, and sometimes I would even, spell it out just to be sure. Now, I'm not consciously trying to remember the name. I'm not being like, okay, Gary, try to remember it, because that doesn't work. What does work is if I create a context around that name. And this is literally how your brain works, okay? If I ask you about your friend's name, your best friend's name, of course you know their name, but why do you know their name? It's because you have all these connections, all these memories about them, you have a relationship with them. So all of that is all tied together by one name, right? Let's say it's Gary. Gary, you think of Gary, you think of all these things. So of course you're not going to forget that name. And so what I'm trying to say is that the name by itself doesn't mean anything, right? The connections around that name, that is what creates the meaning. Like the word by itself, or the name in this case, Gary, doesn't mean anything. It's the connections that we have when we see the word, hear the word, when we think about it. All of those things that happen in our brain when we see that word, that's what gives the word a meaning. And it's the same with language. So how do you form these connections with these words? Well, that's where the power of your subconscious brain comes in, because your brain is literally doing that every single day. Like, this is absolutely insane. It's something that I started noticing a while ago. Like, your subconscious brain is constantly monitoring everything that's happening. So how do you form these connections when you're learning a new word? Well, the good thing is your brain does this automatically. Your subconscious brain is constantly trying to make these connections 24/7, and it's happening, well, subconsciously. So for example, if you're going outside right now, if you're going for a walk, let's say you smell something or something happens, or you know how you're just walking around, just looking around at things, you're not really paying attention to a lot of things, but you're just scanning around, right? That's just what your brain does naturally. Now you might be forgetting most of that, but sometimes after a few hours, a week or a month, something might happen in your life. Maybe you smell something, maybe someone says something to you, and then suddenly, boom, it unlocks like a memory. You're like, oh wait, I remember this. I remember when I was walking outside, I saw this random thing. And it was always there in your subconscious brain, you just didn't know it, right? And it's the same thing with language. These words that you are seeing, that you are hearing, are always stored in your brain. You don't know it, but you just need some context from the outside to trigger that connection. Maybe some activity in like 10 years will trigger a connection in your brain, and then boom, you will remember this video that I'm making right now. So the way it works, let's say we have this word aquarium, right? The word aquarium in English, if you don't know this word, it doesn't mean anything to you yet. But as soon as you hear that word or you read it, your brain will store it inside your subconscious brain. And it will store it near other places with, similar words like fish or water or things that it can connect to, because like I just said, when it makes that connection, that's where the meaning comes from, right? Now maybe you didn't know aquarium, you looked it up, right? And that's fine. I mean, if you don't know a word, you look it up, you see, oh, aquarium means, I don't know, whatever it is in your native language, and then you'll forget it. That's totally fine, because you didn't actually forget it, it is still in your subconscious mind. Now how do you make that connection stronger so that you don't forget it, even though you're not actually forgetting it, Well, that is where the book comes in. Because this is not just a book, like I just said. This is 100, well actually it's not this one. This is also not a book. This is 140,000 words all together in a coherent story, all right? All these words are in a certain context, which means that these words that you see are more likely to be around other words with similar context, right? Because it's an overlapping story. This book is a story with certain themes and characters that have emotions, and they talk about things and they do all kinds of things. And all these words keep repeating in the same context. And that is just perfect for words to form these connections. So that's why people often say you have to read a lot, because reading is, well, seeing words in context, and then you're more likely to remember the words. So now that you know how your brain and your subconscious works, how do you actually apply it to the books when reading? I'd say there are two ways to do this, okay? And I'll show you both ways. First of all, you can look up literally anything that you don't know. And this is what I did at first. Let me show you. Whenever there was a word that I didn't know, I would just look it up. I'll look it up and I would write what it meant. And this is, well, like I said, you can do this, you will know what it means, but you will probably end up translating a lot of the words, and translating is not really learning. However, by looking it up and actually being aware of what it means and having this whole process of looking up, maybe writing something down, it is probably going to stick a bit longer in your brain, but there are still chances that you will forget it. The other thing that you can do is, and what I like to do, is just go over the words, read them. When you feel like this word is really important, you need this to understand what's happening, then look it up. And even if you forget it afterwards, just keep going. Because, and here's actually an interesting point that I want to make, I don't treat this as a book. I see this like any conversation in real life. If you're reading these words over and over again, you're just reading them, if you don't know what they mean, just skip over it. Like if somebody is talking to you and you're listening, if they say a word that you don't know, you're not just going to say, oh, wait a second, that word, what does it mean? And then, you can just stop the flow of conversation normally. So I want to kind of treat books in a similar way, where I read the book, and if there's a word I don't know, whatever, I'll just skip over it. If I see it again and I'm like, well, this word is really important, maybe I should look it up. I look it up. I try to be as quickly as possible with looking it up. Then I continue. And ideally, I want to just go over the words. Don't feel like I am trying to, read every single word, but just go over it as a whole, like a whole story. Now, a disclaimer I guess I have to give is that you have to be at an intermediate level, I guess, in order to do this, in order to really start reading. Because if you start reading and you don't understand like 80% of a sentence, then it's basically a guessing game, and you will end up translating a whole sentence, which is not really like reading a book, right? At that point, you're just translating a book sentence by sentence. I think a lot of people online say that maybe more than 90%, like 96, 97%, 98% of a sentence, of a book, you should be able to understand, and then have 2% maybe that you don't understand, because then you can usually guess by context what stuff means. You can read really fast, you don't need a lot of time to look up stuff. Personally, I think it's fine if I understand a bit less. If I have to look up some things, I don't really mind, as long as I make it quick. Look it up, continue. I'm really focusing on the story. I try to be immersed in the story, not about what does this mean, what does that mean. I'm not treating it as learning, okay? I'm just reading a story, and automatically these words will stick in my brain. I just know that. I have to trust that process. Like, I haven't finished this whole book, I've only finished a few chapters, but there are words in these chapters that I don't know right now, but if I read them, I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that means, because it's in that context. You know, I have this whole scenario in my head of what's happening, this story is like playing in my head, and the words are perfectly attached to that. So that's basically all I have to say about reading. Start reading.